I grew up a lot that year, that 92.
Yeah.
Because he was in the hospital or wherever battling that, and like you said, middle harvest.
This is the Real Food, Real People podcast.
So this week's episode actually got a little bit personal for me, talking with a wheat farmer who farms in Eastern Washington and into Idaho, because he didn't always farm there. He grew up not far from where I grew up. I knew him as a kid. He was a bit older than me, and he farmed and worked for my uncle. But there's kind of a difficult part of that story, and we get into that when we discuss it and catch up after years of not seeing each other. Dwayne Lenssen is his name. He grows wheat and lentils and barley in the rolling hills of the Palouse, scenic country in Eastern Washington. We go there to visit with him right in the offices of the little co-op that he produces grain for, the Palouse grain growers. Great conversation and really educational as well, as far as how wheat is grown and how farming happens in the Palouse. It's different than a lot of other places, and where that food ends up and who consumes it is different too. It goes all over the world. So we talk about all of it this week with Dwayne Lenssen in Palouse, Washington. Our sponsors here on the Real Food, Real People podcast are Mana Insurance Group. You can find them online, manainsurancegroup.com, helping you plan to protect your financial future. If you think about it, that's what insurance is really about, that you're not devastated financially by something in some realm, health, with your car, with your home, et cetera, that could devastate you financially. They'll take care of that there. They have an awesome team. I've known those folks, a lot of them personally, for a long time. manainsurancegroup.com. Also, Dairy Farmers of Washington supporting this podcast, doing a great job over at wadairy.org, sharing the real stories of the dairy food, the products that are produced here in Washington State. Our dairy farmers do an excellent job, and they produce amazing food here, and that's what Dairy Farmers Washington is all about, letting people know about that and sharing those real stories. Again, wadairy.org is their website. Go check it out. This is the Real Food, Real People podcast. I'm Dillon Honcoop, and this is documenting my continuing journey all over Washington State to get to know the real food, real people behind the food that we produce here in Washington State. So you're an Eastern Washington and Idaho wheat farmer.
Yes,
right?
Here in the Palouse.
But you didn't start that way.
No, I did not.
You're originally from the west side, like me.
Yeah, I grew up in Linden.
So talk about what you do now as far as the food that you grow that people eat.
So I am basically sole proprietor, but single operator of a wheat farm, and I raise soft white wheat, both fall wheat and spring wheat. There's a little difference there, but very similar. And I also raise spring barley. I raise spring green peas, lentils, and garbanzos, different varieties and different products there.
So where does this food end up? Does it get shipped all over the world kind of deal? Or I know a lot of the wheat, and we talked about this with Riley Hilly here on the podcast, I think last season.
Right.
A lot of the wheat that's produced here in Washington goes overseas to Asia.
Right. So soft white wheat is just here in the PNW, at least in the Palouse region, 80 to 90% is exported to Pacific Rim countries. So the Philippines, Taiwan, Japan. The big wild card is China. They're not consistently in the market. They're looking for the best deals. So sometimes we're overpriced, and sometimes they don't produce enough themselves. So China is a big swing market for us, but the consistent ones are Taiwan, Japan, Philippines, and we have trade negotiations, trying to develop trade throughout the world.
Yeah.
South America is becoming a bigger portion of our market as well.
So why does the wheat from here go there? Is that because of the different kinds of food that it's used for?
Yes. Our soft white wheat is not bread wheat. It doesn't rise. It's not used for loaves of bread. It's more for crackers, pancakes, pastries. And Japan has some really specialized products that they don't need it to rise.
Right.
And they prefer the lower protein, and they also, with our wheat, they get actually higher percentage of flour from milling it, just because of the variety. And it also, it's white wheat, so it's a whiter flour. They don't have to bleach it like you do with your typical bread wheats.
What about noodles?
Noodles, yes.
There's so many Asian cuisines that involves noodles of some kind more than traditional American food.
So typically American noodles are made out of durum wheat, which is raised in Canada, North and South Dakota, Montana area. That's a very hard wheat, where the Asian noodles are softer. And yes, I don't know all the specifics on types of noodles, but that's a big market as well.
So why is that all grown here then too? It has to do with climate and soils and stuff.
Yes,
right, in Washington specifically.
With our climate in this region, we have low humidity in the summer. We have, in certain areas, we have higher precipitation, and so it just fits our climate better, whereas the red wheats are raised in drier, hotter climates, in the south central U.S., northern plains. And then with our export markets, we're obviously closer to the Pacific Ocean, so we have a freight advantage versus Europe or Russia to the Asian countries. So our main competition is obviously Canada and Australia a little bit, depending on the markets and the timing, of when the crops are harvested. So
how do you go about growing wheat, and specifically this kind of wheat, soft white wheat?
Well, I'm what you would call a conventional farmer. So I till the soil. Mm-hmm. I use fertilizer and herbicides to maintain the fertility and control the pests and the weeds and what might present themselves in a growing season. Yeah. So, there's a lot into it, but we have what we call winter wheat, which is planted in the fall, which I just finished up planting in October. So that plant needs to germinate this month.
Yeah.
Get up. We prefer about 2 to 4 leaf size, so it's not very big, but it needs to vernalize. It needs that cold temperatures through the winter to stimulate it to produce.
Oh, really? So winter wheat actually needs the cold. It's not just that it can stand the cold. It needs
a certain amount of cold.
Okay.
Now, depending on the year and the climate and whatnot, it can all we can still have winter kill. It can still die during the winter if it's, say, we get 20 degrees and we get the 40-mile-an-hour wind, say like a northeaster type of thing.
Yeah.
It can dehydrate that plant and kill it. It could create freezing in the ground, and it could heave up and damage the roots, and it doesn't survive come springtime. So winter wheat needs that vernalization is what the technical term is. So it needs that stimulates. And so winter wheat will produce more because it's already got a jump start. It's putting down roots here and before it gets too cold this fall, and then when it starts growing again in the spring, it's already starting to grow. Where we can't get in the fields and plant the spring wheat until typically April.
So why don't you do all winter wheat? What's the reason for the two difference?
So we do a rotation. So my typical rotation is 1/3 of my acres are in winter wheat, 1/3 of the acres are either in spring wheat or spring barley. And 1/3 of the acres are in pulses or legumes. And so I spread my risk crop-wise by having 1/3 of my acres in each different type of crop.
In case one of them fails based on whatever factor.
Market fluctuations, droughts like we had this year.
Yep.
And then also my workload. So I can get 1/3 of my acres planted in the fall, and so I don't have to try to plant them all in the spring. And so
you wouldn't have time in the spring to plant everything in the spring, or fall, vice versa.
You would have time, but it wouldn't be as timely. That's a big thing is, when the weather conditions are right, you go in the spring and get it in, because it's economically a benefit to do it that way. So
when you're out there and you probably have to work the dirt, like you said, then you go in and put the seed in with a grain drill.
Yeah.
Are you thinking about the people who are going to eat that someday? I mean, it's amazing if you think about it.
It depends on if you just check the markets that day, you know, and seeing if you need to market some crop and who might be buying or which country might be tendering is what they call it when they tender in the export markets in Portland, or which country is coming in this week to tender, you know, and they might fluctuate, you know, affect the market, you know, so you think about which countries.
Yeah, how do you know what the price is? Like, where does that come from?
Well, it's quite complicated. Being soft white wheat, it's a minor crop, so it's based out of Portland price. So we typically see the Portland price. Well, we're 370 miles away from Portland, so then you got to talk to your local elevator, and you pay to freight it there, basically. So when we talk today, the soft white wheat market is $10.60 a bushel. That's in Portland. So we're already 84 or 85 cents off coast price. We call the Portland price coast price. So depending on where you're at in the state, if you're farming in Oregon, that you're only 200 miles away, you don't have to pay as much freight to get it down the river to Portland export market. If you're in Montana, you're paying well over $1 to rail it to get it to Portland if it's an export market. So,
Which at the price that you just named, that's like 10%
yes, and
additional markup.
And so right now it's $10.60. A year ago at this time it was $5.35 a bushel. And if you calculate inflation, that's probably less than what they were raising it for 30 or 40 years ago. It's amazing.
So that's got to be, what, below break even? I mean, that's losing money kind of price? Or can you still, I guess you adjust what you do if the price is that low?
Right. It depends on the market. It depends on your each individual operation. You know, whether if everything's average, it might be below break even. So that's why we raise some legumes. Sometimes they carry the, you know, they provide the income that year because there's a good market there, or vice versa.
Yeah. That's also why you got to save your money on the good years.
Yes.
Because some of those bad years.
Yep. A banker's your best friend, and you need a good banker to help you through your business decisions.
Too many bad years in a row.
Right.
Maybe
it can be tough.
Can be it.
Yep.
You ever had that?
Not in a row. Now this year we deal with the drought that we had the whole region has had.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's familiar with it. It affected us. We were probably production wise down 30 to 40%. But the price is double. And no one would have predicted that. So
it kind of is about the same as last year, sort of thing.
One would think, but then we also have insurance, crop insurance, that we're just about everybody in the region utilized this year.
Yeah.
To carry you through that poor year.
Yeah.
So you know, last year we received some COVID relief package payments from the government,
right,
because of the shutdowns and everything, and it affected our markets. So there are a lot of different factors that go into it. It's not just calculate your yield times the price at the coast, and there's a lot of different sides of it.
So starting in the springtime, I mean, some of your acres already have winter wheat that's yay tall.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it, you come in with tillage equipment. How many times do you go over it to like stir up the dirt and till it and get it ready to seed?
So what we would call the primary tillage is we're doing in the fall. So last year's crop is wheat stubble.
Yep.
And we're tilling the soil to cover up a majority of that wheat stubble to help break it down, get the microbes in the ground working to break that stubble and straw down and that residue to break down so it's fit to work in the spring. Sometimes if you leave it, you can run into problems. So we've done the primary tillage here in October, finish up in November if you need to. Come spring, and we do probably fewer passes than they did 40 years ago. With the tillage tools and the technology that we have,
And keep it minimal.
Made advances with the Palouse region that we deal here with all these hills. I mean, there's some really steep ground, and it can erode, and every day you see signs of that because the ridge tops, the good productive topsoil has eroded off the top ridges and run downhill, gravity.
Right.
So we got different soil types, and so we try to limit the number of tillage passes, within reason.
Yeah.
We'll do a spring herbicide application to kill the weeds and any volunteer. We'll do a pass with the harrow to smooth things out, and then like spring wheat ground, we need to fertilize. So we'll pull a fertilizer machine to inject the fertilizer into the ground. We take soil tests on all the fields to evaluate the nutrient level, and then make a prescription application of the fertilizer we need to raise the crop that year. So for spring wheat and spring barley, we fertilize. For legumes, they typically don't need fertilizer. Sometimes we put a little boost with the seed when we do seed, but go from fertilizing. We'll make a pass with the cultivator to prep the soil just right for the next pass is seeding the crop with the drill. So
and then it just sits and grows.
Well, not always.
What do you all have to do?
So you'll seed. Now for spring wheat, you can leave it, and then once it gets big enough, you watch for your weeds. Typically, you got to spray every year for weeds. So you got to have the right stage of growth for the plant. Not let the weeds get too big, but not spray too soon, and then have more weeds come afterwards. So you work with agronomists for timing and the proper chemistry of herbicides. Sometimes you do need to watch for some diseases or pests, bugs. Sometimes they might need an application, depending on the timing and the growing season. For legumes, you'll seed them, and sometimes you'll roll it with a roller. We have some rocks, some basalt rocks in certain fields, and dirt clods. And with harvest, you're cutting right down on the ground with your header, so it makes life a lot easier if you can roll it smooth to crush those dirt clods and push the rocks down below surface so you don't hit them with the header come harvest. Yep. So there's a couple little passes there might change things up, but typically spring work 4 to 5 weeks at the longest, depending on how much rain you get during spring and shut you down and have to restart. And so typically April's the month that we do the majority of it and get the spring crops planted.
But then you don't irrigate that wheat.
No irrigation.
It's all dry land.
Correct. 2020, we got done pretty normal year, 1st of May. We received 7 inches of in my region, 7 inches of rain in May and June. Just phenomenal moisture. I mean, it was too wet. But then we had a cool summer and it carried, and we had phenomenal crops, record crops in 2020. Now this year, it was dry to start with in April. We were limited on moisture, which went great for being in the field and getting your crop in. But come May and June, we got, maybe an inch. The drought set in, and typically it's nice to get a good rain after you seed, and it get that moisture in the seed zone, and all the crop germinates. There's crop that didn't even germinate because it was so dry, and we didn't get enough rain to germinate it. Some of it came up 3 weeks later when we had an adequate rain shower, so we really suffered here on moisture this last summer.
I always think of it as dry over here anyway, but it was definitely a lot drier than usual.
Yeah. So typically in our region, we're 22 to 24 inches of moisture. That's total moisture in a growing season. So September to August is our typical, what we consider a growing season. So I haven't looked at numbers, but I bet we were probably 17 or 18. And that's substantially less than what we typically have. So it was quite the extremes. We go from a record year of almost too much moisture to a drought year, and so it really showed. But I've never had two terrible crops in a row, so I'm fortunate there.
Yeah. So then, what's it like come harvest time? You got to be watching the plant and the grain and make sure that it's ready to go.
Yeah, you always, there's some people that they're out counting kernels and they're trying to estimate, and it is what it is. I can't change anything, based on the weather. So we'll just wait. You watch for, typically harvest is in August, and we'll fire up, have the combine and the trucks and the crew ready, come the end of July, and then harvest will start in August on the winter wheat. And so we have to cut at a certain moisture, so the elevators won't receive the grain unless it's under 12 or 12.5% moisture. So that's usually what we're waiting for is that moisture content of the grain itself. That way it'll store properly once it's brought to the bin and put in a bin and stored into the winter. So it varies a little bit, but and with our topography, the hilltops and the lowlands, it might be ready up on the hill and drier, and it might not be ready in the bottom and the draws. So sometimes you harvest the field separate. I mean, if you're really, some people will wait till it's all ready, and then you're kind of giving away some weight because you might be 7% moisture on the ridge top, and you're blending it with 12% down below. So some people get eager and excited.
Yeah.
They'll patch around, and they'll this day and age with combines, a lot of them have moisture monitors in the combine.
So you know what's happening
that
as
are
you're doing it.
Sensing it, and you can see what you're getting in the bulk tank on your quality. So
Wow. So is it all hands on deck then at that point?
well, it's pretty pressing. I mean, you want to be timely. We deal with some August rains that can really thwart our harvest intentions, and you get too much rain at harvest and it causes sprout damage in the wheat, which is a quality issue that you can get penalized for when you go to sell your crop. So yeah, usually you start out pretty aggressive, and if things go good and the crop's good, and you kind of stick with it. Ideally you start 1st of August and you cut straight through until the end of August. Just progressing through. We always start with our winter wheat first. It matures the earliest, and then typically the spring barley or the spring wheat will follow it, ideally, and then cut your legumes are typically last, depending on how your fields lay and where they're located and that sort of thing. So I mean, you get in a normal year, 30, 35 days harvest. So ideally you can go straight through.
Probably long days.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. I upgraded a larger combine last year, so this was the first year I ran it. 5 foot wider, 35-foot header instead of 30. So 5 foot more of header and a bigger machine, so you can cut faster. So it made a big difference. I mean, I probably cut my harvest time down by 4 or 5 days, just because the machine has the capacity to handle more acres in a day. So typically, once harvest starts, you do your maintenance in the morning, fueling, greasing, checking the machine over and the trucks, and make sure everything's up ready to go. And then I like to be harvesting by 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, depending on the temperature.
You don't want to start too early,
Yeah.
and then a little dew or
if
moisture on the
right.
grain.
If there's too much dew, the grain is tough to thrash out, and you don't do as well a job. And then, wrap up about dark. I mean, everything's equipped with lights. You can cut into the dark, but if you don't have to, you're more efficient during the daylight hours. So yeah, about a 12-hour harvest day.
Yeah.
And then there's always curveballs, whether you got to make repairs, get parts, or find someone to get parts for you. I mean, it just depends on the day and the timing. So
You folks here in the Palouse are famous for your rolling hills and, all these different curved shapes to the field. How do you do that? And up on, steep sides and, it's not just like a square field, and that's what I'm used to.
Right. It takes so much more time to lay a field out, to do it properly. I mean, we call it working on the contour. So we're working on a side hill to not go up and down, because especially with doing tillage, you can create erosion if you work it up and down and you leave little grooves or something, and then you get a good hard rain, it'll wash straight downhill, and gravity picks up speed, and it can create quite a bit of erosion. So laying out a field, and very few fields are square. I mean, whether you might have a square side where there's a property line, but then it might be right over the steepest part of the field, and it can really, you gotta know be careful. I mean, every year there's combines that roll over. I mean,
so it is dangerous to do that side hill stuff.
I mean, I think it was a lot worse back in the day when you had, smaller machines, less technology. This day and age, most people have a leveling hillside machine. So the combine actually levels itself side to side. The tires move, and it keeps the machine level, so it can do a more efficient job and better job of cleaning.
Yeah,
there are some guys, and it's an expensive thing. I mean, $70,000 to $100,000 just to have this leveling machine. But
that's what it costs for the whole combine, or just for the leveling
just
part?
The leveling machine, and that's probably on the low side. You talk the new combines today are probably $800,000 for the top of the line machine, and I might even be low there. Then you throw in, that's not the header.
That's without the
cutting platform.
Wow.
So headers are 30 to 45 feet long. So you get a bigger machine, you need a bigger header to make it efficient. And so headers these days, $160,000 for a header. So we're talking $1 million. If you just went out to the dealership and they had a machine on, brand new machine, you're talking $1 million for a combine. Now it'll do a lot of work. But
what if you're just starting though, and you don't have that kind of capital, and you can't even borrow that much money? So, how do you get an old one or a small one, or how do you start?
So I had an advantage. My father-in-law was farming, and I bought a majority or a good share of his equipment. So I've harvested 10 crops. So 10 years ago, I bought one of his combines. So it was 10 or 11 years old that year that I bought it. So I ran it for 10 years or 9 years. So you start with older, cheaper equipment, because the banker's not going to loan you something to start out and go buy $1 million machine. Now,
work your way there.
Now, $1 million machine will cut a whole lot of acres in a day. So it does do a lot of work, but it's a big investment up front, and that's a big decision to make.
How did you learn all this stuff? Because again, you're from the west side. We don't do this kind of farming over in Western Washington.
No, I grew up working on my uncle's dairy farm, starting out weekends cleaning calf pens and bucking hay bales and driving tractor, small tractors. So I've always been around agriculture, but, and then getting into high school, working in the raspberry fields, I was not a good strawberry picker. So don't ask me any questions about that.
But your dad was not a farmer.
No, my dad was in construction.
He was in construction.
But I lived close to my uncle, and he was a dairy farmer back in Whatcom County. I got to do plenty of chores and help him out in the summer, making hay and whatever else I was capable of. Did some milking cows in high school and in college, and I knew I didn't want to be in animal agriculture. It was a good paying job, and there was always plenty of work. There's plenty of dairy farms back in Linden back then. So I milked cows, but I knew I didn't want that 7 days a week.
Some people, that's their favorite part, is getting to work with animals and take care of animals. I'm not wired that way either.
Those are blessed people.
They have a lot more patience than I do.
Right. No, I didn't want to deal with animals. So I've always leaned towards the crop production. So when I was in the high school working on the raspberry farm, and then into college working on the raspberry, working my way up, supervising harvest crews and people, from the beginnings. And then once I graduated high school, I decided to come to Washington State University for ag degree. And it wasn't clear cut. I came over and I started out animal science, was my freshman year, and I was like, yeah, I took a couple animal science classes. Like, well, no, let's go more this direction. I graduated with an ag econ degree, so economics. So
Yeah.
so I took more crops. I took technology. I took soils classes. Quite a variety of ag classes. So.
And at that time, you were working for my uncle, right?
Yeah, back in high school, and then my first year of college, I worked for Uncle Rick, so Rick Honcoop, back at Delta Berry Farm on the corner of Birch Bay Linden Road and Bob Hall Road.
So that was the raspberries and strawberries that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, he was good to me. I put in, I think I started when I was 14 driving raspberry harvester on Northwood Road for him.
That's just up the road from where I live now.
And back in the day when, you had kids working for you and they couldn't work too many hours, I'd work the morning shift driving a raspberry harvester for Rick, and then I'd go work for Raider Berry Farm in the processing plant in the afternoon and evening. So I was double dipping there for a while. So anyway, it worked out. And but yeah, I wasn't afraid of putting in long hours for raspberry harvest, and it kind of carried over to now being a wheat farmer here in the Palouse.
What was it like working for my Uncle Rick? What kind of a guy was he to work for? I know he was kind of a hammer down, get her done kind of guy.
Yeah. Sometimes you had a hard time keeping up. I mean, he was a wiry, scrappy dude. He could go, and sometimes you were scratching your head. Well, maybe we better think about this a minute, instead of just going to full bore. So, but no, it was good.
He was sort of the wild child of the family.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. The babies of the families kind of end up that way. I've witnessed that personally. So, but no, it was good. I stuck with him, and he entrusted me with more responsibility over the years, and it worked out good. With me being a high school student and a college student, that have a good job to come back to in the summer.
It's cool to hear more about him because I remember him, but he passed away when I was 9 years old. Mm-hmm. I still remember that because it was right in the middle of berry harvest.
Right in the middle of harvest.
And he had a rare kind of cancer.
Yeah.
And he fought it like nobody fought because he was just so ornery and tough.
Several rounds with it. I mean, it when it first came up, and it kind of went away for a while, and things looked all right for a couple of years before it came back again. Yeah. So, but yeah, it was. I grew up a lot that year. That 92. Yeah. Because he was in the hospital or wherever battling that, and like you said, middle of harvest. And I can still picture this. Lawrence, your grandpa Lawrence would come in and check on me, or your dad Randy would come down the road and check on things, because they had, they were a little older and were adults. I was just a 19-year-old kid supervising 2 different fields and couple of machines, and Lawrence would check in, and if you worked raspberry harvest, you know what the peak is.
Oh yeah.
And when the peak hits, there's nothing you can do to catch up. You just you slave away. The berries are ready to come off. Yeah. And we had some days there we had over 20 ton of production with 2 machines. And I can Lawrence would come back and report on how Rick was doing, and he'd tell him those numbers, and Rick was just
over the moon.
He was speechless. He didn't know what to say. Yeah. Lawrence said it was just his eyes would light up. Yeah. He'd never had a harvest like that.
Because
production wise.
Before he passed, he was in the hospital for at least a couple weeks.
Yeah. It started out, he was at home, I think, getting some care and treatments, and then I don't recall all the details there.
What was that like, being on the farm the day that, we knew that he was really sick and wasn't going to make it the day before, and then he passed? I remember being on my dad's farm with my dad that day, just kind of in a daze.
Yeah, I don't, it was in the thick of it, so we were, I've forgotten how many employees we had, a couple shifts of kids and drivers and truck drivers, and just keeping things moving. What I do recall is his service, and we shut down. That was, in July.
Unheard of.
We shut down because, it was the thing to do. and to get caught up, we pulled some all nighters. I mean, we had 3 shifts on the one field because 40 acres for one machine, it couldn't keep up. And I remember taking the night shift and driving in the dark, and we tried to stay on top of things. So, yeah.
And then you thought at that point, like you said, you had done your first year of college.
Yeah.
Then my uncle passed away.
Yeah.
That summer.
Yeah.
And then that got you thinking.
Yeah,
right?
I saw the opportunity. I mean, I was thinking, hey, maybe I can make this work. I got along well with Debbie, Rick's wife, and I kind of chose at that point. I chose to not go back to school to WSU and help take care of the farm until something was figured out. But I sat down with the banker and sat down with the co-op manager to look into lines of credit or what. I was done a lot of farm economics in high school, competed in FFA and stuff, so I understood that stuff, and so I knew I had to, if I was gonna, I had to have some financial backing and looked into it. So
kind of scary for anybody, but especially, I mean, you were 19 years old, 20 years old at that point, trying to decide, do I take on the massive debt to get into full farming?
Right, and I had been helped out enough that the raspberry industry ebb and flows, so you
knew the roller coaster of the market.
Right. So it was something I looked into, but hindsight, it may be it was a learning experience, but maybe not the right opportunity. So
So then what happened after that?
I took that year off and worked at Corvan and milked a few cows and for Grandpa Ivan and
so you milked relief for my other grandpa.
Yeah, I did.
On the other side, you're talking about working with my grandpa, helping with my Uncle Rick,
right?
But now you're talking about my mom's side. You actually milked. And I own that barn now. I own that place.
Well, yeah.
If you ever want to come back into that old flat barn, it's still there.
No.
Maybe we could find a cow for you to milk.
I think my knee's aching right now just talking about it.
Yeah, so. Imagine how bad both of my grandpa's knees are aching from their 40 years each.
No, it was a good opportunity and maximize my time away from school to earn some income and help pay for school in the future. So I took that year off and I went back. I did go back to WSU the following fall.
Was that a hard decision to make? Like, I'll go back to school. Like, I should do that, but am I missing an opportunity?
No, at that point, it was like, you just sometimes it takes a little growing up, and you kind of take a step back and evaluate the situation. So no, it wasn't too difficult a decision at that time.
Yeah. So then you got your degree, and then what?
Ag economics and graduated in 96. And at that time, I was working summers and even Christmas break and Thanksgiving break. I'd come home. I was working for Enfield Farms back in Linden on the summers with raspberry harvest and blueberry harvest and that sort of thing. So it was a good job and a good experience and helped me pay for college.
Yeah.
And without any school debt by the time I was done. So things were good at that time. In college, I met my wife. She was a University of Idaho student, and I was WSU student, 7 miles across the state line from each other.
Yeah.
And she was a local girl here in the Palouse, Potlatch, Idaho area. And so that's how I got my introduction to the wheat harvest here in the Palouse. And it worked out once I got done with when I finished college. She graduated the same year, and we moved back to Linden. She lived in Bellingham. I lived in Linden for a year before we got married.
Yeah.
And she got an advertising job out in Ferndale and I started full-time for Enfield Farms right out of college. So I continued that work there and just year-round.
Yeah.
But at that point, we'd get done with raspberry harvest, and blueberries weren't as big a deal as they are now. Back in the late 90s there, they were, but it didn't take near the manpower or the harvest crews to do blueberries. So I'd take a couple weeks off, and I'd come to Idaho and help my father-in-law with wheat harvest and lentil harvest. So, and I would there after a few years. I mean, I was supervising multiple harvesters, 2 shifts of 14, 15-year-old kids, lots of truck drivers and harvest drivers, and
This is back in Linden.
Back in Linden. So I would take 2 weeks off, come to Idaho, and it was just my father-in-law and me, just the two of us out in the rolling hills of the Palouse harvesting wheat, and one would drive the combine, the other one would drive truck, and it was just 2 of us.
And you got addicted. You probably thought that was great.
It's the best job in the world running a combine on these Palouse hills. So it was just peace and quiet and no employees to deal with. So,
now you still gotta have nerves of steel to be on some of those steep hills.
Oh yes, I mean I can remember back in those days. I did some mowing in the barnyard with a 60-horse utility tractor and a 7-foot mower, and I was like, I'm going to leave that little hill for my father-in-law because it just didn't feel. It felt a little tippy there, and I just did the flatter stuff. But I wouldn't hesitate a minute right now. I mean,
just get used to it
after this much experience of being on the hills. So.
You ever seen something roll over on a side hill?
Not personally. I've seen pictures. I've heard stories. Usually there's a mechanical error. Whether an axle breaks or the parking brake doesn't get set and somebody gets out and it starts rolling. I've never seen anything personally.
Yeah.
The scariest thing I've probably been around is a harvest fire. And sometimes the combine has a mechanical issue or something.
Creates a spark.
You get some dust collected on the exhaust, on the muffler or some sort of part of the exhaust manifold, and it flakes off. And if the conditions are right, it can start a fire and a field fire, and that's probably the most worrisome accident that could happen. So we keep a tillage tool or a water truck in the area. We have fire extinguishers on them, combines in the trucks.
Yeah.
It's always handy, have another set of eyes. So if you can keep the truck driver near you in the field or something to.
Yeah, because if you can't see behind you while you're driving the combine, you don't know that maybe the stubble back there just caught fire.
Right. So usually it just doesn't flare up immediately, but it'll smolder and you might see the smoke before you see the flames. So
the quicker you can put it out, the better.
Right. I've been involved in a couple in my 20+ year career operating combines. So, but I've seen I've helped out neighbors. Everybody's. If you see smoke at harvest, you're calling around, or you're trying to figure out where it's at to if you can assist.
Everybody just helps.
You stop what you're doing and you go help.
What if it's a neighbor you don't really like? Probably doesn't matter at that point because it gets spread to your place.
No, right. It could impact you. We're farming side by side on property lines, so it could end up in your field just as easy as moving to someone else's. So fire is probably the scariest thing, probably.
So your father-in-law started teaching you the ropes, and how many years did you do that before you decided I'm moving to the east side? So
I helped him every harvest from even in college a couple times, when I had some weekend or something.
Yeah.
So in the 90s. So we decided to move over here in 2004 from Linden with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I actually started working for Wilbur Ellis Company as a field agronomist. So a local branch here, and selling fertilizer and herbicides and working with the wheat growers, not just my father-in-law. So I would help him out every chance I could,
Yeah.
But I was still, had a paying job.
Yeah.
Working locally.
So when did you make the leap from that to being a farmer yourself?
So that would have been, I put in about 8.5 years at Wilbur Ellis, and so I think I harvested my first crop in 2011, my own crop under my name. So 2011. So I've got 10 crop years under my belt, And it's funny. I've heard others say this. You only get about, typically, if you started farming when you're 20 years old, you only get about 40 or 45 crops to perfect it, or
because every time you're trying, okay, how can I do it differently?
Opportunities, and I got a late start, and I'm already 10 years in. It's a challenge. I mean, it's that's the fun part of it, is what can you do better that you can control. I mean, because most thing, the biggest thing is the weather and the climate. You can't control that, so you do what you can do best with your decisions.
Yeah.
To whether it's choosing the variety, choosing the crop, how you manage your fields, you just do what you can to produce the best crop you can. So,
do you love it?
I do. It's been good, and the biggest. I'm trying to think of the word, not honor, but is when a neighbor offers you a new field or something, where you've maybe proven yourself, and others have seen it, and maybe they're ready to retire, or a landlord is ready to change operators, and they come to you to ask you to farm their ground
because they take that much pride in that ground.
Yes,
it's not just whatever. Hey, whoever's gonna who's the highest bidder?
Yeah, there's those landowners that are looking for the highest bidder, but they're typically not the ones you want to deal with, or that I would prefer to deal with. Now, things change, and people, everybody is different, or different generations, but yeah, that's when I've never. That's when they come to you and ask you, versus maybe you do need more acres, and you're trying to come up with. That's what makes you feel good, that especially the former, the retiring farmer, or someone that's been doing it all their life.
Yeah,
that's a good feeling there.
How has that been since you didn't grow up around this kind of farming here?
Right.
Did you feel like you kind of had to prove yourself to that
crowd?
Well,
that's the tough part, and being it was my father-in-law, not my father, I didn't inherit it. I had to prove to him, and he he entrusted me. So and I really, it was basically his recommendation because he turned down ground when I was over here working for Wilbur Ellis that he could have expanded and hired me, but it wasn't the right. At the time I was like, what are you passing that up for? But he wasn't comfortable with it, so I couldn't tell him what to do. But he got offered a couple guys that were retiring, and knew that he did an excellent job at farming. So same thing there, but location wise or timing, it wasn't the right timing. So when the opportunity did present itself, it was a good opportunity, and he put in a good word for me, and then to get that opportunity. So
how long are you going to keep doing it?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, you're at the mercy of the landlords and whatnot. But I got a couple kids in college and one in high school. I got college tuition to pay for a few years. So no, it's I have that mentality. It's like if you enjoy it and you can do it, why stop?
Yeah.
So right now it's I'd say I'm in my prime, as far as my experience and my age and my financial status, what that sort of thing, so keep it up. My son has shown some interest. I mean, he's helped me when he can. He's got his driver's license now, so he's itching to help out. And now I hold the reins a little, maybe a little too tight. So because I enjoy it so much that sometimes there's not a whole lot of equipment to operate, but I've had him in the tractor seat by himself, and it takes a little bit on my confidence too that he's going to be okay and be fine at doing it. So,
cut him loose. Yeah. What does your family think of it? Think of you, moving over to Eastern Washington, away from Western Washington. What was that like? What did your folks think?
Yeah, I mean, they were sad. Obviously, you're taking the grandkids, and they're 400 miles away now. So, but they've still come over, and different times, and obviously harvest is the best time to come visit. You can ride in the combine and see the amber waves of grain, and just the scenic, being a real scenic area over here. So yeah, it's everybody adjusted, and it's been all right. So
yeah, you lost your dad a few years ago.
Yeah.
What did he think of the whole thing?
Well, that was in 2016, so I was not farming. I was just helping my father-in-law when I could on the weekends and whatnot. So that there was never really my operation to show him and to get involved. They did come and visit, but he had that quiet presence. He wasn't a real vocal and cheerleader type personality. So, but no, I learned my work ethic from him, and he saw that, and that's what he really appreciated, I'm sure.
Yeah. He's proud of you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for chatting with us, sharing the whole story of how this all came to be. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And you get,
I mean, this is a time when a lot of people are moving east. Honestly, you did it 20 years earlier,
right?
But a lot of people are looking, maybe move to Eastern Washington, maybe move to Idaho.
Right.
And I know some of your ground is in Idaho, or a lot of your farming is in Idaho, right?
And I've seen that. I've got a field right next to me. I farm on 3 sides of it this year, and 60-acre field, and the county let them divide it into 4 parcels, and I could have 4 new houses right next that. And sometimes it can be an issue, and sometimes if they understand it can be a good situation. But that uncertainty, I mean, and then the price of land is just skyrocketed.
Even out here.
Yeah. It's kind
Why
of.
is that? What's pushing it?
So part of it is this drive to get out of urban centers. I mean, I've talked to people from Portland that want to move here because of all the chaos that's been down there. You hear the stories of the Californians moving to the Boise area, and it's just exploding down there. Well, then the people that are down there want to move north, and so they come to North Idaho.
Like chain reaction,
right? It's a domino effect. So it's a combination of everything.
Does that change anything for you though? For farming, how does that put pressure on you?
Well, I mean, if you introduce these people that aren't familiar with the farming aspect, I mean, whether it's dust from the tillage pass you're doing and it's blowing into their yard or in the front of their house, or it's the crop duster airplane flying over at 5 a.m. because that's when the wind is calm and they need to get the crop sprayed. It's the trucks at harvest or just transporting equipment. That 15-mile-an-hour combine, you're trying to be safe and go 15, 20 miles an hour down the highway, and you have a string of traffic behind you. Some people don't understand or don't want to have patience to wait a little, be patient to let the machine get to the field safely, and then they can be on their way.
What about land prices? Does that affect like the economics of what you're doing?
Right. Yeah, it's inflated, and and what I would say right now, it's above what is feasible. I mean, in my perspective, there's getting the land that does come available. A lot of it is brought to it in an auction, land auction. And there is some big real estate investment groups that have come, they're looking to diversify, get out of the stock market, and they have a portfolio of farm ground. And they're driving up the prices, and they'll buy it all versus a parcel.
Right.
And then they're looking for their return on investment, and so they bid it, give it to the highest bidder, the farmer operator that'll pay the most rent for it. So yeah, I lease all my land partially because of that, because land prices are steep
So as that value goes up and people are using it as an investment, and there are lots of other dollars outside of just the farm world in it,
Right.
then it makes it probably harder and harder to farm in Washington State, right?
Unless yeah,
or Idaho or wherever this is.
unless you have that relationship. I mean,
With the landowner.
maybe you're friends with the investment guy, and so he offers it to you first.
Right.
So you got to look at it both ways. I understand they want to get a return on their investment. It's just a matter if it's realistic. So that's been going on for a while now, and we've seen some ramifications where big operations have had to downsize because it's not financially feasible. They expand, they get big, they're traveling back and forth, and they can't pay the bills. They got to downsize. It hasn't really had a huge major correction, but we've seen some beginnings of that certain locations and areas. So
what's the difference in doing business between Washington and Idaho?
Not a big difference. You hear of more regulations being introduced in Washington. Department of Ecology comes down. You feel more comfortable in Idaho because they're not pushing that environmental agenda. So typically, if you're not going to see the same regulations come down from the state legislature or whatever organization, ecology type of thing, So there's a more of a relaxed feeling in Idaho as far as that side of business wise. And then,
so it is getting in some ways harder to farm in Washington than Idaho.
I
guess it depends what you're doing.
I can't speak from that because all my farm ground is in Idaho, so I can't compare them exactly. I have friends and neighbors, and I can talk to them. But so yeah, there's potentially there. Fortunately, there's just been enough common sense at the last minute that some stuff hasn't been in. Now I would say, maybe our regulation or truck driving regulations are different in the two states. So you got to be, you got to weigh that, and there's some extra stuff to deal with there. But overall, I'm sure there's added expense if you're specifically in Washington. So.
A lot of stuff to keep track of.
Yeah.
A lot of moving parts.
I mean, that's what it does help not having any full-time employees. And, I have some part-time help. So can be a blessing and a curse because you're always hoping to find someone on a short-term basis, for a few weeks a year or someone, that can handle that or whatnot. I do as much family as I can. My son helps a little bit. My brother, Dan, is living in the Colfax area. So he's helped me out a number of years driving truck on weekends and last year with COVID he got laid off for a period of time and I put him in the tractor at spring work.
There you go.
He learned something new that year in 2020. So yeah, it helps out when you got family around that can assist you with some of that short-term labor needs. So it's good.
Well, thanks for growing good food and working with your family and supporting your community. I know you do a lot of stuff to do that, and thanks for sharing your whole story with us here.
I'm glad you present our stories the way you do and do an excellent job at it. So thank you, Dillon.
This is the Real Food, Real People podcast. These are the stories of the people who grow your food.